Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for the first season of the new Netflix series Shadow and Bone. What Shadow and Bone is essentially about is basically we center on the character of Elena Starkov, and she is reunited with her childhood friend Mal. These two have been friends for a very long time, but very quickly after they're reunited, Mal is sent off to join this military group where they're going to cross this thing called the Fold, which is essentially this dark place with these flying monsters and things like that. And Elena wants to do what she can to try to join this crew in order to reunite with him, but in doing so, she ends up discovering that she actually has these powers known as the Sun Summoner that is going to take down the Fold, and so she tries to do what she can to fully get a hand of it. Meanwhile, we focus on this other group known as this Crows, which is essentially this gang of sorts, and they are given this mission where they are to track down the Sun Summoner and bring them over to this character, Dressin, in exchange for basically, making Elena their bounty in exchange for a bunch of money. So now the race is on to see if Elena can destroy the Shadow Fold before the Crows end up getting there. So Shadow and Bone overall, I didn't really know how to feel about this show. I feel like since Game of Thrones ended, every single streaming service has been making it their sole mission to find the next Game of Thrones. This has been something that they've had a vested interest in doing, and especially considering how many of them have flopped, I really wasn't expecting much from this show. I didn't think it was going to be all that great, so I didn't really have any real plans of watching it, but thankfully, I was actually hearing some really good reviews. I heard people saying that this is actually one of the few winners, and so I checked it out, hoping that this would not be the next Netflix show to get canceled, just because I didn't finish it within a month of it airing. Yeah, Netflix still has a major problem with that, but that's a whole other story for another video. But anyways, I finally watched the first season of Shadow and Bone, and I have to say, this show is actually really good. Shadow and Bone, I think, is one of the few adaptations and one of the few sort of fantasy medieval shows that I actually do think has a legitimate future. There's a lot of things that this show does really well that I really did appreciate overall, but we are just getting into right now, starting off with the cast. When it comes down to this cast here, again, I didn't really expect much because there isn't anyone that I know all that well. This is not a very relatively known cast, but I have to say, everyone does a really great job here. I was pretty much impressed by everyone. Jessie May Lee, who plays our main character of Elena, again, I haven't really seen her in anything before, but I feel like after this show, we definitely will, because she very much impressed me within the show. Elena's a character we'll get to in a little bit, but I think what Lee did a really good job with is, again, just seeing how bewildered she is by everything. This is a character that goes in a very unexpected direction, and she has these powers, but she doesn't really know how to fully handle it. She doesn't really know what she's gotten herself into, and so you really do see her grow throughout this entire series, and what starts off as her being very confused and bewildered with how to go about it, eventually she starts to get a lot more confident, and Lee, I think, does a really good job of portraying this transformation, portraying this growing confidence within her, and she's very likable as this character. There's a lot of emotional depth that she goes through, and I just thought overall she did a really good job here. She is a really likable lead. She's very badass at points, and I think she's everything you really could want in a main character like this. So I really did enjoy her performance here a lot. I thought she did a really great job. Same with Archie Renaux, who plays the character of Mal, another actor that I'm not all that familiar with, but I thought he did a really good job. He was very charismatic. He's someone that, again, you're very much rooting for in that way, and I think he had a lot more range to him than I really was expecting, and I really did enjoy his performance within this show. And I think the chemistry between Jessie May Lee and Archie Renaux is also really good. This is the main sort of bond of the show, and they don't have a ton of screen time together within this first season, but they work really well together whenever you're on screen. You really are rooting for these two. They have such a natural sort of bond, and I really did enjoy their chemistry throughout this entire show. But the characters I really want to talk about are the Crows in this show. That whole group, all of them are are fantastic, and I really loved their performance here. Whether it's Freddy Carter, who plays Kaz, this guy that really is kind of emotionless. He does a lot of shady stuff, and he's rarely affected by it, and so he does a really good job portraying that. Or you have a Nedge, played by Amita Suman, who is pretty much the badass of the group. I really did enjoy her performance. Or Kit Yun as Jesper, who has some of the, probably the most sympathetic character of the entire show. I really did enjoy his performance here a lot. Those three work really well together, but unsurprisingly, the real standout of this show, and the person I think that everyone's going to be talking about after watching this first season, has to be Ben Barnes here, who is phenomenal as the character of General Kerrigan. Look, Barnes as an actor is someone that I've always really enjoyed. I've always seen him be an actor that has a lot of potential within him, but this is definitely, I think, one of his best performances yet, because Kerrigan as a character is one that you are instantly compelled by. You want to know more about him. You don't know a lot about, what he's really doing and things like that, and when you start to get more of a handle on what he's doing, Barnes' performance becomes that much stronger overall. He goes all in portraying this character, and I really love what he ended up doing here. I thought he absolutely killed it within this role, and he was really the big standout for me. Whether it's, how he's a mentor to Elena, and you see a lot of chemistry between those two, or later on when you start to see, the direction that he's going in and sort of his own agenda of sorts, I thought he just did a really great job within this show. So really this entire cast, I think everyone does a really good job. Like I said, the majority of this cast is relatively unknown, but I really do think everyone gave a really solid impression here, and these are all actors that, I haven't seen them before, but I definitely do want to see them in more in more projects after this, because they had a lot more talent and a lot more range than I expected. You watch a show like this, you think it's gonna be like the CW, where they base it more off of looks than talent, and that's really not the case here. This is a really talented bunch, and I really enjoyed pretty much everyone here. Alright, but now we really got to get into the thing that very much impressed me, which is the directing of this show. Going into something like this, I expected it to be very derivative. I expected this to be something along the lines of like a knockoff Game of Thrones, where it's very epic and it has this really dark tone throughout. And here's the thing, it does have that tone. That fantasy element is there, but I think it actually does work. The show does a really good job of keeping it very interesting, but not trying to be too overly done when it comes to the fantastical elements. It just naturally happens, and so I think that's something that was done really well. But what was even more impressive to me about the show is that it's not just a fantasy show, it also is a heist show of sorts, because you have a whole other show going on when it comes to these crows, and that provides for some really nice levity, but also just some really fun moments. And I think as the developer of the show, Eric Heisserer did a really good job, I think, with putting the show together, because something you might not know going into it is that this is basically an original project. I mean, yes, it obviously is an adaptation, but that adaptation is based on two separate books, and so the plot of this show is completely original, where these characters come together. That's not something that originally happened in the book, and I think he made a really ambitious decision in doing that. I have not seen a lot of creators do something quite like that before. A lot of the time, they're trying to be as faithful to the books as possible, and they're trying to do what they can to not piss off, the fans of the books, but this is a really bold choice to try to combine two books together, but he pulls it off seamlessly. It never felt like I was watching two distinctly different shows. It felt like it just kind of all went together, and that these characters could very well be in the same story. They could be in the same universe, and I really did like the way he went about it. And like I said, I think it made the tone that much better overall. The show can be a lot of fun, but it also can get really dark, and it makes those elements a lot more pronounced. When the show's fun, it's a lot of fun. When the show's dark, it's really dark, and you're really riveted, and I think he just did a really good job at putting that together. So I was very impressed by his directing here. But let's get into the writing with this show, because that's another thing that I think is kind of tricky when it comes to shows like this, because there have been so many countless fantasy dramas at this point. You just kind of wonder, what else can they really do? And I think what it really does come down to, what the show wisely realizes very early on is that there's not a lot that they need to do in order to fully hook us in. You just really need a likable group of characters, and thankfully this show does that really well. I think the most brilliant decision is that our main character Elena is someone who is just as quickly thrust into this world as we are. She doesn't really know a lot of what's going on. She understands some things about the Grisha and what's really going on, but she doesn't have a full understanding of her powers. She doesn't really understand what these powers can do. She doesn't understand the way they work and things like that, and so she's just in the dark about things as we are. And I thought that was a really smart choice because it didn't make it seem like there's all this information we have to find out, because we're finding it out as Elena does, and I really enjoyed that a lot. I feel like too many shows, they try to have like all of this exposition throughout the show just spouted at you, and it really takes the viewer out of it, I feel like. And this show isn't really concerned with that. It wants to take its time to really fully develop this world, and I think with a character like Elena, someone who, like I said, is kind of an outsider to a lot of this, it was very smart to center the show around her. But it also helps that Elena is a very smart character, is a very likable character. Yes, sometimes she does not make the greatest decisions, and that is definitely the case here. There are moments where I think you'll be frustrated by Elena, but you also get the sense that that's actually what makes her that much more endearing of a character, because she is very naive. She is very unaware of what she's doing, and so you want things to work out for her. You want her to get a full understanding of these powers, and you want to see her go up against this character of the Darkling. You don't know entirely of what she's doing, but that's what makes her such a good character in that way. It also helps that the show takes a lot of time to get you to understand her bond with Mal, because it's not just that these two were like childhood friends. No, these two really did depend on each other throughout their entire life. Elena and Mal were both orphans, and they had to live pretty much, they had to basically grow up together, and so you really do understand that bond that they have. It wasn't nearly as forced as I feel like it could have been. I feel like that's always a trope in shows like this, but by making them both orphans and childhood friends, there's a very natural sort of connection there, and so I think it really does work when it comes to those two characters. So that whole side of things is really interesting, especially when you get Kirigan further into it. His character, again, he's very mysterious. He's, we're introduced to him, and you can see that he is very intrigued by Elena's power. He wants her to get a further understanding of what she's really doing and how she's going to eventually end up going up against the Fold. But you can see as the show goes on, there's a little bit more to him. You don't really understand, who Kirigan is until way later into the show. And when they start to dive deeper into it, it actually really did work. And I will admit, to some people, it is going to be predictable where Kirigan ends up going as a character, but I thought it made the character that much better as a result. I thought it made a lot of his, previous actions that much more understandable. It gave us a better understanding of who he really is, and just, it gave the viewer clarity that we really needed. So I think they did a really good job of establishing that character, but also his bond with Elena, which is very complicated in that way. So again, I think that side of things is really good. But again, that's not all we're dealing with in this show. You also have this whole plotline when it comes to the Crows, and that part of the show is so much fun to watch because these three characters are really different. They're not always on the same page. So this mission that they're tasked with, you can see it's not as easy as it sounds, where they're just going to end up, infiltrating where Elena is, and they're going to track her down, and they're going to, take her to this guy that is going to, like, get rid of her powers or whatever. It's not that simple because, again, these characters are very different. Jesper, you have someone that he is very emotional, and that's kind of like his weakness. And then you have Cass, who he's very level-headed, but he often has plans that don't really work out because the rest of his team isn't. Then you have Inej, someone who is probably the most She's probably the most tactical of the group, I would say. She's definitely the one that has the she's definitely the one that has the best plans, but that's one of the most, I think, interesting parts of the show to watch, is just see these three kind of butt heads and them kind of go about how they're going to do this mission. I thought was a really smart choice, and it makes for some really fun moments. The show almost has an Ocean's 11-esque feel to it, which I was not expecting to say with the show, but it really does. Once they eventually go on this quest and you're seeing them trying to perfect this mission, it's a lot of fun to watch. There's especially episode 5, when they eventually, start to get further into this, you really do see that come to a head, and it's a lot of fun to watch. And so I think they did a really good job when it came to that side of things as well. So I think the writing overall is really good here. The show does make a really smart decision as well to divide most of these characters throughout the first half of the season, just so we can see who they really are, their individual missions, get us to really understand where they're all coming from, and that way when things eventually do converge in the second half of the show, we are that much more invested, or that much more locked into it. I think that was a really good decision for them to do, but I will say I can understand if someone does find the first half of the season kind of boring, because it does take a while for something to happen. It's not that there's nothing going on, but it is a lot of setup. That's the best way to describe episodes 2, 3, and 4. I think episode 1 kicks the plot into gear really well, and then there's a bit of a lull in 2, 3, and 4. And I gotta be honest, as much as I was enjoying it, I was also kind of like, all right, when is something really gonna happen? Well, you just gotta wait until episode 5, and that is when things really kick into gear. That is when things really get great, and you understand the true potential of what this show is really trying to do. And I think that's also when the show really does start to, showcase just how great it really is. Because again, remember, this is basically an original work. Once those characters come together, it's essentially an original work, and I think it's really well done in that way. So I really enjoyed the writing in the show a lot. I think it's a lot better than you really would expect it to be overall, and definitely one of the things that very much did impress me. Now, and like I said, the world building here I think is really good too. There's obviously a lot going on within this world. It's very elaborate when it comes to the Grishaverse and things like that, but I really felt like by the end of this show, they did a really good job of introducing us to everything. They don't throw too much at you. They don't try to overcomplicate things. They keep it pretty straightforward overall when it comes to the fold and how all of that stuff works. And then, what the Sun Summoners can do, what Elena's real purpose is and things like that, how she fits into everything. I think they overall did do a really good job with that, and far better than I really did expect them to. So I was overall impressed when it came to the world building here. Getting down to the visuals of the show, this is something I was really worried about, because a lot of these fantasy shows, you can tell, are very cheaply made. They're very rushed into production, and I'm happy to say that is not the case when it comes to this show. When we see Elena's powers of the Sun Summoner, it seems real. You're not looking at it in disbelief. You're not looking at it like, no, there's no way, that looks fake, that looks like a green screen. No, it looks tangible within the universe. It looks like something that could actually happen. When they're going up against these creatures, it feels like there's an actual threat there. So I think they did a really good job when it came to the effects of this show. They're a lot better than I expected it to be, and there are also some really great action scenes. But what's good is that it's also very sparingly. Is that they also choose to have these visual effects done very sparingly. Elena's powers, for example, there's a whole thing throughout this season where she actually can't access them. There's quite a few episodes, in fact, where she can't access it for a while, and you don't really know what's going on, but eventually you do get a sense of what's going on. And so when her powers are starting to come out more, and they start to play a bigger role into the show, I think that's when things became a lot. I think that's when the visual effects, really stuck out, and you really do get to see just how good a lot of it is. And I also think, like, again, time period wise, everything looks really great. The sets and things like that, everything's really well done when it comes to the cinematography. A lot better than I really did expect it to be. The score as well, I think, is really good in this show, especially once we get to the back half of the series. I think Joseph Trapanese does a really good job when it comes to the score here and the editing. The season is only 8 episodes long, and I think that was the perfect length. I think, again, there's a really good point at the midpoint of the season where things really start to come together, because that second half of the season, that's really when the show starts to show its true potential. I think that's really when it delivers in that way, and I think that's when it produces some of the most memorable moments of this entire show, for sure. So I think they did a really good job with that. So again, there's a lot that I really am enjoying about this show. I think there's a lot of things it does right. Is there anything it does do wrong? Well, this show's not perfect. I will definitely say that. This show is not perfect at all. There definitely are some things that do bring it down. The one thing I will definitely say is that there are a lot of tropes here. There's not as many as you'd expect, but there are points of the show, specifically when it focuses on Elena and Mal, that the show does sometimes feel like it's diving headfirst into some tropes. But again, I think what's smart about it is that the show doesn't rely too much on it. It does enough that's different to where that didn't take me out of the show as much as I thought it was going to. So I don't have too much of an issue with that. What I do have an issue with is this third story that I didn't tell you about. So we do have these two storylines. We have the stuff with Elena and Kirigan and Mal, but then we also have the stuff with the Crows. And then there's this third storyline in there, and it focuses on this character, Nina, and nothing against the actress. I think Danielle Galligan did a good job in this role, but her whole storyline between this character Nina and also this guy Mateus that we follow, I found to be completely unnecessary overall. I will say it does start to have more of a purpose towards the end of this season. Nina, her character, does, but her whole storyline, I just did not find myself caring about. And it was one of those things where I kept forgetting that it was there. Like, every time they cut some, like, wait, who are these characters again? And then they kept showing them more often, and you think it's finally going to go somewhere, and then it just kind of screeches to a halt. And I just was not very impressed with the way they ended up going about that. I didn't think that was a very strong part of the show. I think that was easily the part where the show dragged the most for me, and I just didn't care that much about these two characters. I really wanted to, but it just never really clicked for me in the way that it did. And again, I think Nina is going to be a lot more integral of a part of this show after this season, especially with the way things wrap up at the end of this season. But her whole side plot with this character Mateus, I just don't really know what it was supposed to amount to. I didn't really find it to be all that interesting, and I felt like, especially when we already have two stories going on, you don't need this third one. It just kind of felt like it was padding out the runtime, and I just wasn't really into it that much, so I don't think they did a great job with that. And the only other thing I will say is that the character that Kaz, Inej and Jesper, that they're trying to pay this debt to, that they basically strike this deal to track down Elena, we don't really see him that much, this character Dreesen. He's a really legitimate threat in the first episode. You're really threatened by him. You're really, you really see the menace in him as a character. I found him to be a really well-written villain, and then they don't really do much of anything with him. You don't really feel his threat throughout the entire show. The Fold is definitely more of the prominent threat here. That's more of what's at play. And so I just found that Dreesen as a character really faded into the background after that first episode, and I would have liked to see a bit more of him, because it just felt like he didn't really have much to do overall, and I felt like he maybe should have just cut back to him every so often, talking to one of the characters, maybe threatening them and things like that, just to show that that threat is still out there. But they really don't show him all that much. They mention him, but they don't really show him all that much, and so I think it made him lesser evil than I think the show is really going for. Other than that, though, I think there's a lot of things the show definitely does do really well, a lot better than I expected it to. And again, when it comes to a show like this, I think that, the fact that I only have a few complaints here and there, that tells you how good this show really is. So now I do want to take some time to get into the spoilers for the first season of Shadow and Bone. So if you have not seen this first season, I actually really do recommend it. I think it's a lot better than you really would expect it to be. So I'm just going to dive into it right now. So I guess we should just talk about it. The reveal with Kirigan, that he was actually, the Darkling, and that he was basically taking advantage of Elena, where essentially it seemed like he was getting her to understand her powers more. Elena becomes this huge, almost celebrity. Everyone wants to, everyone wants to learn more about her. Everyone is like interested in talking to her. She becomes this huge presence in that way. But we realize that this is all intentional. What he's really trying to do is expand the fold for his own use. This is what matters the most to him. He wants to do what he can to go after this. He wants to do what he can to take on this responsibility himself. And again, the reveal when Bagra talks to Elena about it was not shocking. It wasn't shocking, but I think what made it effective is that the show takes a lot of time to try to trick you into thinking that maybe Kirigan is not that bad of a guy. Maybe he is genuine with what he's doing. You start to see that Elena really starts to depend a lot upon him. It seems like there's a romance of sorts that's maybe going to start there because he's the one that gets her to understand her powers the most. They grow very close in that way. You think maybe something's going to happen, and then right when it seems like they're, starting to get affectionate towards each other, Bagra shuts it down. And not only that, she reveals to Elena that she's actually Kirigan's mother, and that he is a lot older than Elena thought he was. And I think that was a really good reveal. I think it really did kick things into high gear. And again, it gave us more clarity into his character with the way that he was acting, why he wanted her to care about this so much. It wasn't because, the fold was such an imminent threat. It's because he needed to make sure he was the guy pulling the strings in that way. And so you really do get to see that. But I also like that we get to see his backstory in episode 7, where we see that he was in love with this healer, and it seemed like things were really working out. They had this really nice relationship and things like that. But unfortunately, what ended up happening is that they ended up killing this girl. They killed this girl basically because they wanted to capture Kirigan, and basically, the king wanted to go after Kirigan because he was rounding up Grisha and all that kind of stuff. And so Kirigan ended up turning into this, he basically turned Grisha into a much more ancient form of magic. And so he's actually the one who directly created the fold. And that's why everything's happening. All these king soldiers they were trying to capture, and they just turn into beastly creatures. So it was a really good way of showing, why he doesn't feel what he's doing is wrong. He thinks he's in the right here. He doesn't understand, why this is really such a horrible thing to do. And I like that his entire group turns against him when they realize that he actually wants to expand the fold in that way. I thought was a really good moment. I like the way all of that was done. And I also like that Kirigan didn't die. We thought maybe he was fully defeated after the finale, but I like that in the end, he actually is still out there. He's going to continue to assimilate this army of sorts. He's going to get revenge against Elena, and I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. I'm very excited to see what they're going to end up doing with that, how that whole thing is going to turn out, and I think it's going to make the show that much more riveting overall. So again, I really enjoyed a lot of what they did there, and Elena getting a hold of her powers, finally showcasing the Sun Summoner in its full glory. It was just a really satisfying moment. But I also like that she's sort of perfecting some of the things that a Sun Summoner is supposed to do. When it comes to that animal, she didn't just want to kill him. She realized that she could still use her abilities without killing him, whereas Kirigan wants her to follow that code. He feels that this is the only way to, be a Sun Summoner, because that's what he wants. It doesn't align with what he wants Elena to do. And so I think that all of that stuff was very well done for sure. And I will say the one thing I did enjoy about this finale is that it does give Nina more of a purpose, where we see at the end of the show, basically, you know, they go on this ship and then Nina is on this ship, and that basically Nina is the heartrender of sorts. She's going to help the crows with whatever their real mission is at this point. So I'm very interested in seeing where that's going to go, and their whole mission, where it seems like a Nedge is going to try to get her freedom and things like that, and that if they get one jewel from Elena's hairpiece, it's basically going to buy her freedom. I like the way that's going. I like that I like that Kaz as a character is starting to grow a bit more emotionally attached to things, so we see that's a good transformation from him. And then Jesper, he's growing a lot more courageous, so we do see these characters grow a lot throughout this first season, and that's something that I overall really did enjoy. But when it comes to the Nina character, like I said, her entire storyline with Matthias, I just found completely unnecessary. You know, we have this whole thing where at first they're completely against each other, and then they start to really like each other to the point where it seems like they're going to run away. And then what ends up happening, basically Kieran's soldiers end up catching them doing this, and so he ends up slowing down Matthias's heart rates, and Matthias tries to like strangle Nina for what she did, and basically now he's going to be locked up in prison until he dies, and it's just like, what is the point of this whole thing? If he's going to be locked, if basically the whole story was that these two weren't supposed to work together and then start to like each other, and then suddenly they just don't like each other again, I just don't understand what the point of this story really was. And I get it that Nina is going to be a lot more prominent within the rest of this season, but I just found her story overall to be so nothing, and I don't think they did a very good job, like I said, with really fleshing, with really giving us a reason to care about her story. So that was the one thing that did bring things down for me. But overall, guys, Shadow and Bone Season 1 is a lot better than I expected to be. It does a really good job of taking familiar elements from fantasy shows, but kind of turning them on its head in a really special way. Whether it's the crows, where it provides this more heist element to the show, or the character of Elena, who is very wide-eyed and naive, but she also has just as little of an understanding of this universe as we do. And it sets things up for what I think is going to be a really interesting second season. I'm very interested in seeing where the show is going to go. And especially for a show I had very little interest in going in, I ended it honestly really interested in seeing where else this show can really go. Finding out more about the Grisha, getting us to know more about Elena's powers, getting us to know more about the crows and things like that. There's a lot of potential for where this show can go, and I think out of the sort of next Game of Thrones sort of shows that we've been getting, this is the one that really, I think, has the most potential to really succeed overall. This was a much better season of television than I really was expecting. It's got a really great cast throughout. All of them are very likable, but Ben Barnes is really the big standout of this entire show. Some surprisingly very thrilling action sequences and some really good writing, and you have what's easily one of the better shows to come out of the Game of Thrones type, follow-ups in a while. So I am going to give Shadow and Bone Season 1 overall a B+. But alright guys, so my review of the first season of Shadow and Bone. Let me know what you guys saw this first season overall. Left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.